Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's great to see everyone. A little bit of unfinished business. I believe we missed a birthday last week. Sandy Peters, August 22nd. I'm not Jo May, so I'm not going to lead you in singing, but I wanted to make sure that we honored you. For those of you who weren't here last week, we know that Pastor Tim is at a very important conference in Canada, in the woods, over bear bait. So we're hoping that he'll be very, very successful. But while he's gone, I'm going to continue with the series that we've done, Christianity and Culture, and the name of my message is Well Educated. So I want to give you a little bit of history of myself, just so you say, well, yeah, she has a right to talk about education. So I started my college education a little bit later. I waited for my kids to get a little bit older, and I went into social work. And my goal and my passion was that I wanted to work with domestic abuse survivors. And I had my intern set up with the Diane Pepler Agency, and it fell through for a variety of reasons. And I knew the superintendent at school, and so I went to her, because there's not a lot of intern opportunities in this area, and she agreed, and I fell in love with education. I mean, to me, and I'll cry here, it's not a job. To me, it's not even a purpose. It's my mission. And my mission is that each and every student in our school would feel seen and valued and respected for the gifts that they bring, and that they would know that they have gifts given to them by God Himself to make themselves in this world better. I also want you to know that there is so much wrong with education. And I could talk for days about what's wrong with education, right? I could get you guys all fired up, and we'd all go, yeah, that is wrong. But that doesn't do any good if we're not going to move forward and try to change it at the state level or the national level, right? I always say that if you aren't going to do action in order to change something, then you don't get an opinion, right? If I go into the teacher's lounge and I can fire everybody up and say, this is what's wrong with education, and everybody would say yes, and we would be 100% right. And when I went into my classroom in the afternoon and they went into their classroom, we'd all have bad attitudes, wouldn't we? So if I'm not willing to make the steps, I don't get an opinion. So my way to counter that is I decided I'm going to change my little corner of the world. And I'm going to do what I can in my little corner of the world. So I want to start with what the word education means. Education, educate, comes from two Latin roots. One is educare, which means to mold or to train. And the other Latin root is educare, which means to bring forth, to draw out. I love that. I love that. Now I want you to think about the Bible, and I want you to think of all the ways that God teaches us in His Word. He teaches us through poetry, through history, through philosophy, through stories, through parables. He talks about so many different professions in the Bible. He talks about jewelers and craftsmen and teachers and prophets and evangelists, and about singing and dancing and playing instruments. See, our God is extremely creative. And in Exodus 35, it says, He has filled them with the Spirit of God, with skills, with abilities, with intelligence, and knowledge of all kinds of craftsmanship. This is what I think. This is what education, Debology, means. God has given each one of us a special skill, a special talent, right? And education's job is to bring forth and to draw out that skill and that talent. And once it's brought out, we need to train it and to mold it. Because we all know, right? Skills, talents, gifts, when they are out of balance, when they're not trained and molded, they become dangerous to ourselves and to others. My gift, one of my gifts, is a gift of encouragement. And if that's out of balance, I become an enabler. And that's dangerous for myself, and that's dangerous for the people around me. My husband's gift is, one of his gifts is the gift of excellence, which is really tough for us-ish kind of people, but when his is out of balance, it becomes perfectionism. And that's dangerous for him, and it's dangerous for the people around him. So we bring forth the gifts, and then we mold, and we train them. And I can tell you that that is not happening in American school systems today. And I feel like that is one of the biggest travesties that we face. See, if you look at the American public school system, you will conclude that the whole purpose of education is to spin out college professors. We train people from the neck up, and mostly on the left side. And the problem with this is that we negate many students' talents. Sir Ken Robinson says that all kids have tremendous talents, and education squanders them pretty ruthlessly. And I would have to agree with that. You know, I think the subjects of math and science and English are great gifts. They're great things to know, and we all need to know some of that. But I don't think they're the only ones. And because of this, many talented and brilliant and really cool students feel like they're not valued. They're not needed. They're not skilled. There was a young boy several years ago. I knew that once he got out of high school, he was going to be just fine. He had gifts and skills. He was going to be able to provide for his family and do it in a very nice sort of way. But it had nothing to do with public education, right? He had those basics in elementary of math and English, and he endured high school. And when I say endured, I mean endured, and rightly so. Rightly so. He came to school for 10 years thinking he wasn't worth anything. That what he had, what God had given him, wasn't valued or needed. And as students are juniors, they take something, a standardized test called the ASVAB. I'm not a fan of standardized tests, but I do like the ASVAB for this reason. It's a military test because it not only tests you on science and math and English, but it also tests you on welding and electricity and mechanical ability, all the jobs that they use in the military. And I passed out the scores, and his were pretty low. Rightly so, in English and science and math. But on mechanical interpretation, he was off the charts. And I went to him and I said, look at this. You could write manuals for John Deere. And he got a smile on his face. And he grabbed his paper and he walked around to all the students. He said, look at this. I could write for John Deere. It was the first time That our public school education gave him a chance to say, my gifts matter. Think about that. You know, we failed that boy. We failed him. We tried to train and mold, and we never brought out. We never drew out. We never brought forward his gifts. And when we do that, we set ourselves up for behavioral issues, for all kinds of sexual experiments, for drugs, for alcohol. We failed him. See, I think all of those things, the sexual experimenting, the drugs, the alcohol, the meanness that the kids are toward each other, it's not the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. The real problem is that their gifts, the very gifts that God gave them, aren't being honored. They're not being shown that they matter. And we all know that when we feel like we don't matter, we don't always act appropriately either, do we? God's word tells us in Exodus 35 that when we are using our gifts, we are serving as a testament to God. I love that. I love that. You know, when I think of my husband and his gift is building houses, and when we're on vacation, we go through suburbs. Go figure, right? I think it's crazy, but that's his gift. And when he goes by homes that he has built, and he sees generations of people enjoying life, he has a satisfaction that none of us can feel because that's not our gift. But we can understand it, right? That's when we're using our gift for God's glory, for the testimony of God. And I understand certainly because I feel the same way about when my words bring back fruit, or when I counsel someone and they have a breakthrough. And although Zeke doesn't understand that, we understand the feeling when we are using our God-given gifts to change the world for the better. You know, there's a story I read in a book called Epiphany about a young lady named Gillian Lynn. Has anybody ever heard of Gillian Lynn? Gillian Lynn was a young girl in the 40s, and she was attending school, and the teacher called the mom and said, I'd like to have you come in for a conference. Gillian is not paying attention. She's really not turning in her homework. She's disrupting other people, and I can't get her to sit in her seat. So the mom came in and determined that they would take her to the doctors. And so the doctor sent her to a psychologist. And during the 20-minute session with the psychologist, where Gillian was sitting on her hands, the doctor and the mom talked about all the different issues. And the doctor said, you know, Gillian, I would like for you just to sit here. I need to talk to your mom over what we all discussed. And so the mom and the doctor left the room. And before he left, he turned on the radio. And in this room, there was a window. And they watched her. And once the music started, Gillian started to dance. And she danced and she danced. And the doctor said to the mom, your daughter isn't sick. She's a dancer. Gillian Lynn turned out to be a dancer and was a choreographer for many of the most popular musicals in the world, including Cats and Phantom of the Opera. Today, we would have had a multitude of meetings. Parents would take the students to the doctor. The doctor would give diagnoses and medication, and we would have sucked the God-given skills and gifts right out of her soul. Now, I'm not saying, I've seen kids that have ADHD. I get that. I've seen medication do wonderful things for it. But I don't think it's an epidemic like we are doing today. When you put a kid behind a desk for 8 hours a day, they're going to fidget. They're going to get up. They're going to move. And the only thing they're suffering from is childhood. Right? So, public schooling was created before the 19th century to meet the needs of the Industrial Revolution. That was the reason for public school. Now, years ago in England, there was a gentleman, his first name is Rick, and I can't think of his last name, that did do some form of education, actually Sunday school. And he did it because he saw the poverty of so many of the children, and he wanted to give them skills necessary for them to work their way out of poverty. But in America, it started right before the revolution, or right before the Industrial Revolution. I show this video usually the first day of school, and it's called "I Sued the School System." And what it is, it's about the school system being on trial and a prosecuting attorney talking. And he's obviously much better than I am, but he kind of does it in the rap. And this is what he says, a portion of what he says. "Let the record show that you were made to train people to work in factories, which explains why you put students in straight rows, nice and neat. Tell them to sit still, raise their hand if you want to speak. Give them a short break to eat, and for 8 hours a day, tell them what to think. Oh, and make them compete to get an a letter that determines product quality, like a grade A piece of meat." See, there was a time and a place for school systems like that. We were training the people to work in factories and on lines, but it served its purpose, right? I want you to think in your head about computers 100 years ago. If there was even computers 100 years ago, I don't remember. But they were huge, right? It could fill this whole building, and it would be able to maybe send data to Engadine, right? It wasn't much. No, I want you to think of computers today, right? Sleek, small, and can do so many things. Now I want you to think of telephones 100 years ago, right? The box on the wall, right? And I want you to think telephones today. And now I want you to think of public school systems 100 years ago, a classroom. And I want you to think of them today. They haven't changed. They haven't changed. And the truth of the matter is, anything that I can teach you, you can look up and have the answer before I can get it out of my mouth. We need to teach students how to think, not what to think. What are employees looking for in 2024? They're looking for communication skills. They're looking for critical thinking. They're looking for creativity. And they're looking for adaptability. All the things that we're not teaching. All the things that Jesus was. I want you to think about that. Jesus had great communication skills. He was adaptable. He was a critical thinker. And yet we're teaching our students to sit 8 hours, raise their hand if they need something. You know, it's much more difficult to bring out the gifts, because when we bring out the gifts and we let students be creative, it's messy, it's loud, it's noisy, it's uncontrollable. And if I was selfish and said, and could pick my class, I would pick the 16 students that they're most obedient and didn't make a sound. But see, my gift should be a blessing to you, and it should be work for me. It should not be easy for me and hard for you. And to bring out those gifts, right? When we go in the woods, or when we're mining for gold, or for diamonds, or for natural gas, you don't walk out and it's right there. You have to dig below the surface to find those gifts, to bring out those gifts. You know, I think of education like this: fast food. Fast food is standardized. Every McDonald's does exactly the same thing, and every product that you can get a Big Mac in St. Ignace, or you can get a Big Mac in Florida, and they're the same because it's standardized, which is what we've done to our school systems. If you go to a Michelin restaurant, it goes on what the culture is. It's made for you and for that niche of the country. That's what education should be. Instead, like fast food is destroying the physical bodies of our children, our education is actually destroying their souls. So, whoops, let me see where I'm at. There's a little girl talking back about creativity. There's a story about a little girl who was in class and was drawing a picture, and the teacher said, "What are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "Well, nobody knows what God looks like." And the little girl said, "They will in a minute." Shouldn't we all have gifts and eyes that see like that, and the confidence? Why do we think schools are the same like they were 100, 150 years ago? Here's what I think. We've taken God out of the schools. And when we take the creator of creativity out of the schools, we continue to do what we have always done. You know, have you ever noticed that as people, we find something we love, and then we make a law, and then the law becomes more important than the love? Think of seatbelts, right? Somebody loved the idea that it was going to keep people safe and save lives. So we created a law, right? Has anybody ever been stopped by the police and said, "I am so glad that you have your seatbelt on, and that law is working, and bless you, and I'm glad you're safe"? No. But we have gotten, at least I have, gotten pulled over for not wearing it, and then fined. Think about the Pharisees in the Bible, right? They loved God. They loved God. And then they made all these rules. And then the rules and the laws became more important than God. And they didn't say, "Hey, I love your spiritual side." They said, "You didn't follow the Sabbath." Or you ate something that was unclean. The law became more important than the love. And I think that's what's happened in education. Somebody came along and loved children and thought children were being not treated the same. And so they created a law. And now our teachers spend our day checking boxes, right? Crossing our T's and dotting our I's, so we follow the letter of the law. All the while letting these students with unmined talents and skills and gifts not be recognized. You know, children are only 20% of our population, but they're 100% of our future. And they deserve better than what we're giving them. Sorry, I'm going to cry. Now, I'm going to pick on us a little bit. Do you know that 30% of all high school graduates and 50% of all college graduates never pick up another book their entire life? Isn't that unbelievable? The scriptures tell us that we need to love the Lord our God with all of our hearts, with all of our souls, and with all of our mind. When we stop learning, we stop loving God with all of our mind, and therefore stop being what God wants us to be. And it's interesting because the older we get, the more we don't want to learn. Anybody ever get themselves in a rut? Yes, we get into ruts in our minds, in our bodies, in our actions. You know, Natasha, is Natasha here? No, she's not. Natasha and I, King, had met this week earlier about something else, and after she was done, we were talking about pickleball, of all things. And we were talking about when we went to pickleball out here at the club, and how we were so nervous, and how we changed our minds 6 or 7 times. That was simply to play pickleball in Nobbinway at the Hiawatha Club with people we know and love. But we were changing things up. Think about us as we get older. We don't want to change. That is not loving God with all of our mind. God wants us to use it to change and to grow, not for our glory, but so we can be the glory of God in our actions, our words. And the last thing I want you to touch on is knowledge without wisdom, which really is the most important. I love knowledge. I am the biggest nerd around. I usually have 6 or 7 books going, right? I listen to sermons all the time. I listen to podcasts. I listen to anything I can get my hands on, except I'm not a big music fan. I have one playlist. It's my pontoon boat playlist, and I play it when I'm on the pontoon boat. And when I get a nugget of knowledge, when I get it, and it just does something to me, I sob. I love knowledge. And knowledge is a wonderful thing. But knowledge without looking at it through the lens of God is just useless facts. See, I look at this, I love this. I love these quotes, and I just read somewhere in some Christian journal, you should never use secular quotes in your message. But I love them because I can see through the lens of God, God's word in those quotes. I can see God in everything. And that's why I continue to do it, because we should be able to see God in everything, secular, not secular. Colossians tells us, and I'm ad-libbing, that knowledge without wisdom is purposeless and sometimes dangerous. The accumulation of great knowledge does not necessarily mean a great person. The key to a purposeful and fruitful life is in knowing God, because in Him are the hidden treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Hitler and his associates were brilliant men. And you know, the first time I heard that, I was like, it was offensive to me. But I want you to think about that. They were brilliant. They were critical thinkers. They were great communicators. They allowed such a travesty to happen, and we did nothing. But they had this tremendous knowledge with no God lens to see it. And so they became brutal and evil and nasty. Training your mind without training your heart is no education at all. The sad thing is this, I see this in family members. It seems like people that become more and more educated in their head become less and less educated in their heart. And I know that my son has shared in college, he's actually had to lie on papers because he knew that if he told what he really believed, that his grade wouldn't be as good. And I challenge him to say what you say what's right. So, make sure you are training your heart. So all the wonderful knowledge, and knowledge is a wonderful thing, can be seen through the lens of God. So, what should our definition of well-educated be for men and women of God? Number one, we need to bring out the gifts of ourselves and for others, and we need to train them and mold them. Gifts, of course, are great, but if they're not trained and molded, they often get out of balance, and then they become dangerous things. Number two, we need to grow in our creativity, right? God has given each of us special skills and gifts and talents, and we need to be creative with them so we can share them with others. So we are magnified and glorified. I shouldn't say we are, God is, through our creativity and our gifts. Number three, we need to be pushed out of our comfort zone. This is especially for the older people because we get into ruts in our heads, in our hearts, in our minds, in our actions. And how can I be relevant to this generation if I'm still doing what I did 40 years ago? And the most important thing, the very most important thing, we need to educate our heart, not just the mind. We need to see all knowledge through the lens